Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected and is liable to burst forth suddenly in a moment of unawareness. At all counts, it forms an unconscious snag, thwarting our most well-meant intentions. These words, spoken by Carl Jung, pierce through the polite mask of ordinary awareness and drag us into uncomfortable territory. The recognition that beneath the civilized surface of who we believe ourselves to be lies another self, a hidden self. Jung named it the shadow, the rejected, the repressed, the denied. It is the sum of everything we label as dark within us. Our fears, insecurities, destructive impulses, but also our forgotten instincts, suppressed desires, and yes, even our dormant, raw creativity. When Jung speaks of the shadow, he reveals a paradox. It is not only filled with what we fear about ourselves, but also with what remains untapped, our powers, instincts, and vitality waiting in exile, personal and collective shadow. Jung makes a profound distinction. There is the personal shadow, the unique underworld of an individual's psyche, and there is the collective shadow, the shared darkness of humanity woven into the tapestry of culture, politics, and society at large. To confront the shadow, whether personal or collective, is no small task. It is an initiation, a dangerous yet liberating pilgrimage toward wholeness. The anatomy of the personal shadow. So what exactly is the shadow on a personal level? Jung offers a hauntingly simple definition: the thing a person has no wish to be. Imagine it as the attic of your inner world where unwanted fragments of self are banished. These are the parts you deny, suppress, and lock away: jealousy, cowardice, selfishness, rage, lust, laziness, shame. The ego, desperate to protect its polished self-image, casts them out. But exile does not destroy them. Instead, the shadow lives on within, autonomous and alive, waiting, under stress, intoxication, emotional intensity, or even fatigue. The sealed door cracks open, and the shadow leaks through. A cruel word said in anger, an urge to lie when cornered, an eruption of envy against another's success. Jung warns that once repressed, these forces develop their own independence. They act like hidden saboteurs, bursting forth at the worst moments and shaping behavior under the radar. This is the autonomy of the shadow, a rogue psychological force operating outside conscious control. Projection, the shadow sip's escape route. But the shadow has other tricks. Rather than confronting it in yourself, your psyche projects it onto the world. What you hate to see in yourself, you begin to notice obsessively in others. This is projection. It's why people who cannot own their own selfishness are quick to call everyone else selfish. Why those unable to admit their arrogance accuse others of pride. Why ruthless judgment toward others often reveals the very flaw hiding within. Projection is the shadow's most cunning maneuver. It builds a distorted mirror world where you unconsciously fight yourself by fighting others. Beyond individuals, this mechanism of projection fuels tribalism, hatred, prejudice, and even war. What we cannot face within, we demonize without. The shadow sips hidden gifts. Yet, Jung's understanding of the shadow is not limited to darkness. It is far more nuanced and paradoxical. The shadow hides treasures as well as terrors. Beneath its surface are not only your demons but also your disowned strengths, your courage, your instincts, your wildness, your creativity, your capacity for vitality and passion. These parts are cast into the shadow not because they are evil, but because they threatened social acceptance or clashed with your ego's ideals. As Jung said, the shadow displays a number of good qualities such as normal instincts, appropriate reactions, realistic insights, creative impulses, etc. Simply put, what we repress as unacceptable is often exactly what we must reclaim to feel fully alive. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's close collaborator, explained it beautifully. The shadow is not necessarily always an opponent. In fact, he is exactly like any human being with whom one has to get along, sometimes by yielding, sometimes by resisting, sometimes by offering love, whatever the situation requires. The shadow turns monstrous only when ignored, denied, or misunderstood. When acknowledged and integrated, it can become a teacher, a guide, even a source of renewal. The psychological cost of denial. When the qualities buried within the shadow are denied, the personality becomes lopsided, an impoverished version of what it could be. By repressing what feels unacceptable, we don't erase it. We simply exile it where it festers in secret. These denied aspects act like hidden snags in the psyche, subtle but powerful obstacles to growth. Take an example. If someone grows up believing assertiveness is the same as cruelty, they will repress their natural strength, stifle their confidence, and silence their voice. On the surface, they seem polite and agreeable, but beneath, frustration builds. Their career may stall because they cannot advocate for themselves. Their financial life may suffer because they avoid asking for fair pay. Their relationships may feel hollow because they cannot speak their truth. And here lies the twist. What we repress in ourselves often appears outside of us, provoking us. Such a person may feel resentment toward those who embody what they themselves are denying. Seeing a colleague unapologetically assertive, asking, demanding, succeeding, sparks envy or even contempt. The shadow grows denser in silence until the inner conflict erupts as guilt, bitterness, or misplaced anger. Integration, bringing these qualities back into awareness, dissolves that tension. To admit I, too, can be assertive without being cruel is to reclaim wholeness. Dreams. The shadow sip's voice. Dreams serve as a mysterious yet reliable gateway to the shadow's domain. They slip past the defenses of waking consciousness and reveal truths the ego would rather ignore. Carl Jung observed that the shadow often appears in dreams as figures of the same sex as the dreamer, a hidden double, a distorted mirror image of the self. These dream shadows frequently act as inner judges or rivals. They may embarrass, frighten, or unsettle us precisely because they hold up what we've buried, our envy, our cruelty, or perhaps even our unexplored courage and power. By reflecting on these figures, we are invited to dialogue with what we deny. Dreams, in this sense, are not random. They're nightly invitations to shadow work. The call for shadow work. To face the shadow consciously is what Jung called the realization of the shadow. Today, we often refer to it simply as shadow work. And make no mistake, this is not easy work. It demands discomfort, honesty, and resilience. Like Hercules wrestling with beasts as part of his labors, shadow work requires facing inner monsters head-on. This psychological labor involves radical self-honesty, watching your emotional reactions, especially moments of rage, disgust, envy, or contempt. Careful observation of relationships, seeing how projection disguises our own disowned qualities as faults in others. Dialogue with dreams and imagination, exploring recurring images, symbols, and voices from the unconscious. The aim is not to defeat or destroy the shadow, but to bring it into awareness, to integrate what was unconscious into the light of understanding. Jung reminds us, there is no light without shadow and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. The goal, therefore, is not perfection but wholeness. Jung called this lifelong integration individuation, the process of reconciling ego with self, the conscious with the unconscious, till one becomes complete. The collective shadow society sips, denied self. The shadow is not confined to individuals. Entire societies carry shadows, cultures, nations, and even humanity as a whole repress uncomfortable truths. These collective shadows hold what is taboo, feared, or systematically denied: prejudice, greed, exploitation, oppression. And just like in individuals, what is ignored eventually erupts. We see this on a massive scale in wars, racism, class divides, environmental destruction, systemic injustices. History itself exposes the shadow side of humanity, the things we would rather not admit yet cannot escape. Societal healing, then, requires collective shadow work. It is the confrontation with buried histories, with cultural biases, with the realities we'd prefer to deny. Without this confrontation, the unconscious forces of society will continue to sabotage progress. Encountering the shadow, the path to authenticity. To turn toward the shadow is to face yourself in the most radical, courageous way possible. It is to meet precisely what you fear most in yourself, without projection, without excuses, and without turning away. The encounter is unsettling. It feels like wrestling with darkness itself. But within that confrontation lies liberation. For when you strip away denial and projection, the truth of who you are, both your light and your dark, emerges whole. This authenticity dismantles guilt, dissolves self-sabotage, and unlocks repressed gifts. The task is not glamorous. It is painstaking, like excavating through heavy earth to uncover hidden seeds. Yet in that excavation you gain discernment, seeing clearly where your potential lies, where your distortions harm you, and where your raw creativity is waiting to be born. Most people will never take this journey. Fear and inertia keep them lodged in the shallows of partial awareness, living fragmented lives, impoverished by what they refuse to face. But for those willing to brave the descent, shadow work becomes the forge of authenticity. And authenticity, Jung and his successors remind us, is not about perfection. It is about integration. It is being fully human, light and dark, noble and flawed, conscious and unconscious, woven together in wholeness. Embracing the shadow. To walk the path of true self-knowledge is not merely to polish the light, but to face the depths of our darkness. It is to embrace both radiance and shadow, constructing the imperfect whole of what we truly are. Shadow work reveals a paradox. The very fragments of ourselves we most dislike, the impulses, the flaws, the instincts we've locked away, are the keys to deeper freedom, untapped creativity, and genuine wholeness. Jung encapsulated this eternal truth in a single line: there is no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. The shadow is not simply an opponent to be subdued, or a monster to be slain. Paradoxically, it is also a guide, an unlikely companion, leading us through the labyrinth of the self. To embrace it is to begin the journey of individuation, where we stop aspiring to saintly perfection and start living in authentic wholeness. The shadow, personal and collective. Facing what we deny takes us far beyond psychology. It forces us into the raw heart of human history. Ask yourself, what if the greatest danger we face is not lurking outside of us, but buried within? What if the horrors we condemn, the brutality of wars, the madness of genocides, the machine-like cruelty of modern oppression, do not come from outsiders or monsters, but from the same inner forces we all carry? This is the frightening truth. Jung and depth psychology reveal, beneath the polished self lives another, and we all carry it. The shadow is not the stranger, it is us. It is the jealous thought left unspoken, the prejudice that hides behind politeness, the rage disguised as civility, the desire for dominance dressed up as morality. And the shadow does not end with individuals. It expands outward into what Jung called the collective shadow. This is the pool of humanity's denied impulses, woven not into one psyche, but into the bloodstream of entire cultures, nations, religions, and civilizations. Here lives systemic racism, oppression, exploitation, the cultural lies we tell ourselves, and the historical wounds that societies bury rather than face. It isn't just the personal greed of one individual, it becomes the structural greed of corporations. It isn't just the violence of an individual, it is the sanctioned violence of regimes, armies, and ideologies. The uncomfortable conversation. To speak of the shadow, personal or collective, is to speak of what most people avoid. This conversation is not meant to be comfortable. It cannot be comfortable. The shadow lives precisely where comfort flees, on the battlefields of history, in the scars of trauma, in the places where families, institutions, and nations conspire to forget. The shadow sits in the silence after atrocities go unnamed. It hides in the rituals and traditions that celebrate one side of history while erasing the brutality of the other. It thrives in denial, so long as no one dares to drag it into the open. Thus, to discuss the shadow is to summon the deliberately forgotten. It is to polish a dark mirror and force ourselves to look inside. What we see reflected there will unsettle us, but there is no awakening without discomfort. Only when the veil is torn down and the repressed comes into light can any true healing or transformation occur. The nature of the shadow. At its simplest, the shadow is the dark twin of the ego. If your conscious identity insists, "I am loving, I am honest, I am peaceful," the shadow quietly counters. And yet, what about your cruelty, your dishonesty, your aggression? Jung observed that every psyche carries opposites. Society rewards light, kindness, loyalty, intelligence, creativity, and punishes dark, selfishness, lust, envy, cowardice, violence. To be accepted, we repress the latter. But repression does not destroy. What is buried is not gone. It waits for its moment. And so it slips out unexpectedly in the cruel comment you regret, the twinge of envy you deny, the explosive anger you can't explain. More often, it emerges indirectly through the mechanism of projection, when we hurl our denied qualities onto others. We tell ourselves, "I am not greedy, they are greedy. I am not hateful, they are hateful. I am not corrupt, they are corrupt." This displacement creates an outer world haunted by our inner denials, and when masses of people project together, the collective shadow is born. Suddenly, entire groups are demonized, nations cast enemies as embodiments of what they cannot face in themselves. Tribes form identities out of hatred, blindness, and division. This is the shadow Jung warned us about, not only the personal darkness of the individual, but the tectonic darkness of humanity itself. To confront it is to awaken from illusion. To embrace it is to begin the work of becoming whole. From the personal to the collective shadow, picture this: millions of individuals, each suppressing their inner darkness, envy, prejudice, greed, lust for control. One person represses, another projects. One hides their hatred while accusing others of being hateful. Another denies their corruption while crying out against it in their neighbor. Slowly but surely, these private denials begin to overlap. They fuse into group identities. Communities rally around shared projections, and cultural myths form. What began as an individual's shadow becomes welded into the bloodstream of a society. This is the collective shadow, the sum of all the repressed and disowned traits of a people. And if it sounds abstract, look closer. It's not abstract at all. It's written into blood, law, and history. Religions preach love and peace, while justifying holy wars and inquisitions. Nations boast of freedom, while erecting systems of slavery and segregation. Families proclaim loyalty and honor, while hiding abuse in silence behind closed doors. Societies boast of progress and virtue while scapegoating minorities, branding outsiders as less than human. The collective shadow needs only one condition to thrive: denial. Every time a culture says, "This evil is not ours, it belongs to them," the shadow deepens. And the deeper it grows, the darker the eruption when it finally breaks free. The mask of civilization. Erich Neumann, Jung's brilliant student, observed that civilizations preserve order only through repression. We wear masks of civility, politeness, law, ritual, morality, and masks are necessary. Without them, society descends into chaos. But beneath the mask simmers something volatile, untamed. Look at our modern world. We pride ourselves on progress, pride ourselves on enlightenment, democracy, technology. Yet beneath the glossy surface lie sweatshops in collapsed factories, corporate exploitation disguised as innovation, oceans deadened by overfishing, species erased every day, and skies darkened by invisible smog. Our endless consumption fuels our pride, but conceals its true cost. This is the modern collective shadow, not medieval dungeons or ancient warlords, but devastation hidden behind glass skyscrapers, polished advertising, and political slogans. A shadow sanitized, globalized, dressed in the symbols of prosperity, and yet the principle is the same. What we repress festers, and what festers unchecked eventually erupts. Historical shadows. History's most searing lessons are written in shadow. Take Nazi Germany. Ordinary Germans were not born as demons. They were born human, like you, like me. But through a perfect storm of projection, propaganda, and silent denial, the collective shadow of nationalism and racial supremacy overtook consciousness. What started as whispers, grievances, rumors, conspiracy theories built into chants, then into laws, and then into concentration camps and gas chambers. The Holocaust was not the act of a handful of monsters, but millions of ordinary citizens who obeyed, participated, or stayed silent. This is what happens when the collective shadow seizes control. Look too at the shadow of colonialism. Europeans spoke of bringing civilization and Christianity, yet their ships carried chains. In one hand they brought the Bible, and in the other they carried disease, guns, and servitude. Beneath noble rhetoric lived greed and conquest, written into the soil with stolen resources and enslaved bodies. And that shadow is not buried in the past. It lingers still in global inequalities, in cultures erased, in languages silenced almost to extinction. Or take America. The rhetoric of freedom and independence coexisted with the genocide of native nations, the enslavement of Africans, the silencing of voices that dared to challenge the myth of liberty. Or the Soviet gulags, a system that spoke of equality and workers' paradise, yet filled vast prisons and labor camps. Or apartheid South Africa, writing racial supremacy into law. Or Rwanda, where years of division and propaganda ignited into unimaginable slaughter. The names, dates, and places change, but the underlying forces remain disturbingly constant: denial of shadow, projection onto others, scapegoating, silence, and at last, eruption into violence. Psychological mechanisms of the collective shadow. Why does humanity fall again and again into shadow? Why do we repeat the same destructive patterns across generations? The answer is denial. On the individual level, denial protects the ego from pain, but on the collective level, denial becomes deadly. A people insist, "We are not violent," and in that certainty, their violence swells unseen. We are chosen, we are pure, and in that purity grows contempt for the impure. We are free, and beneath that freedom hides imprisonment, exploitation, and silent slavery. Denial always fuels projection. What I cannot face within myself, I throw onto you. If I repress my aggression, I convince myself you want to harm me. If I bury my prejudice, I accuse you of being the dangerous one. Entire societies mirror this process. Nations demonize nations. Parties demonize opponents. Religions demonize heretics. Each time the unacknowledged shadow is displaced outward. Why is projection so seductive? Because it absolves us. If evil belongs only to them, then we remain innocent. We become the victims, the righteous, the justified. And in that illusion of purity, we permit ourselves to wage wars, oppress, enslave, and exploit, all in the name of defense. Wafted Tutduds. Carl Jung warned us, the true danger is not shadow itself, but our refusal to recognize it. Religion and myth as mirrors of the shadow. Human beings have always dramatized the shadow in myth and religion. Christianity imagines the devil, once the brightest angel, cast down, now eternally opposed to God. Islam speaks of Iblis, the whisperer who refuses to bow, tempting humans into delusion. Buddhism tells of Mara, the tempter of the Buddha, personifying desire, doubt, distraction, and fear. But here is the depth psychology insight. These demons do not only live out there, they are mirrors. The devil is not merely external, it is lust denied, envy suppressed, hatred disowned. To call evil inhuman is to miss its terrifying reality. It is profoundly human. Myths echo this truth again and again. Think of Pandora's box. Open the container of denial, and what was hidden bursts forth as suffering. The Greek Furies pursue those who bury crimes instead of confessing them. Even the story of Cain and Abel is a myth of projection, envy repressed, expressed outward in murder. Every great myth suggests the same pattern. Denied shadow turns destructive, and only by meeting it can transformation occur. Hence the archetype of the hero's descent into the cave, into the underworld, into the dragon's lair. As Joseph Campbell reminds us, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Shadow is the cave, consciousness is the treasure. Modern shadows. But the shadow is not just in myth or history, it is alive now, shaping present reality. Consider today, its collective shadows. Racism, societies declare themselves post-racial, even as bias stalks prisons, courts, schools, and streets. Denial itself is shadow speaking. Consumerism. We equate growth with virtue, yet beneath the glossy advertisements lie sweatshops, child labor, collapsing ecosystems, oceans choked with plastic. The shadow is ecological destruction, masked as progress. Nationalism and war. Each nation proclaims itself the victim, the righteous defender of peace, while waging endless violence. The more each side insists on purity, the bloodier the conflict becomes. Technology and AI, we celebrate innovation while ignoring surveillance, manipulation, and dependency. Technology's unacknowledged shadow could yet be our most far-reaching. Climate change, perhaps the darkest shadow of all. Denial of science. Blame passed endlessly to others. The illusion that it won't affect me. All the while, the earth itself records the truth. In storms, fire, drought, extinction. In each case, the problem is not unsolvable. Humanity has the means. What is missing is recognition. Denial fuels darkness. Naming it is the first step to dissolving it, healing the shadow. So then, what can be done? Is healing possible? Jung's answer was simple but difficult. Yes, but only through courage, only through truth. At the individual level, shadow work begins with awareness. Notice your own projections, observe your harshest judgments of others, and ask, what in me do I not want to face that I now see in them? Write down dreams, notice slips of the tongue, pay attention to sudden flashes of envy, rage, lust, or shame. These are not accidents, they are messages. Integrating shadow does not mean indulging dark impulses blindly, nor does it mean repressing them absolutely. It means acknowledging them, drawing them into consciousness, and transforming their energy. As Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. At the collective level, healing begins with truth-telling. This is why post-conflict efforts like South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission matter. They do not erase suffering. They do not restore the dead, but they break denial. And breaking denial is the beginning of freedom. Collective healing also demands apology, reparations, and remembrance, walking again through the places of unspeakable violence, not to glorify them, but to ensure silence is broken, so violence cannot fester unacknowledged. For nations, this means education that tells history honestly, not sanitized, patriotic mythologies, but honest reckoning with crimes and failures. It means leaders who have the courage to admit collective faults. For global humanity, it means acknowledging and grieving ecological collapse, then acting together. And for individuals, it always circles back to the same beginning: face your own shadow, or you will unconsciously feed the collective shadow. The courage of darkness. Carl Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual SIP's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. The shadow will never disappear. It cannot. Shadow is the counterpart of light. Where there is consciousness, there is unconsciousness. Where there is goodness, there rests the possibility of evil." The goal is not annihilation, it is integration. To carry your shadow consciously is to rob it of its grip. To deny it is to let it rule you in disguise. If we are afraid to look at our own darkness, then others will be chosen to carry it for us. Scapegoats, enemies, victims of prejudice and war. If societies are too afraid to face their historic wounds, their descendants will inherit them darker still. But if we have the courage to confront, to name, to integrate, then we can finally release our children from the weight of silence. And so here is the final truth. The shadow is within you, and it is within us, all of us, as humanity itself. You cannot outrun it. You cannot erase it, but you can face it. You can name it. You can integrate it. The shadow is what we fear most, yet it is also the threshold to wholeness. To step into it is to step into your full humanity, no longer divided between the mask of light and the denied darkness, but whole, awake, authentic. Face your shadow, accept it, carry it responsibly. That is how you stop feeding the darkness of the world. That is how you step into the fullness of being human.